On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Katelyn Donnelly. She is the founder and general partner at Avalanche VC. We're going to talk about what an avalanche is. We're going to talk about, whether it's an early trend, whether you're too early in the market, what's a massive trend, focusing on what's coming next, how to find them. We're going to talk about founders and operators and can you actually take advantage of it? Are you the right founder, entrepreneur to actually take advantage of it? And what happens if you are or not? And Katelyn, I'm super excited for you to come in and talk to us about this.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. All right. Before we start, tell everyone what Avalanche VC, what kind of companies do you guys typically invest in?
So we invest pre-seed and seed. So usually in the first institutional round of capital in companies that transform how people learn, earn, and own. And you don't have to do all three, maybe just one. But what we really look for are truly disruptive ideas and technologies that are hitting on an inflection point or an avalanche that'll have a massive sweeping change for society.
Awesome. I love the name. I love it when the name fits the mission. That's always a great parallel. Well done. We're going to talk about what an avalanche is, and obviously you kind of alluded to it. And obviously we've heard about unicorns, and you hear about that a lot. And what is the difference between, or are they the same thing? When we hear the term unicorn and avalanche, in your view, are they different?
Well, unicorn was a term coined by a venture capitalist 10 years ago to describe a company that achieved $1 billion valuation. And an avalanche for us is a massive trend that, it's a natural phenomenon that where, you can't really predict you can see some of the conditions for avalanches. There's invisible changes underneath the snowpack. But when and how big the avalanche will be is kind of unpredictable. And we have a quote that we like from a historian about how historical changes like an avalanche, there's all these invisible trends, but then when the inflection point happens, there's sweeping change and the landscape is changed forever. And so we're looking for those potential inflection points where the landscape could completely change and a company that we invest in is taking advantage of it.
I guess, you used a lot of terms there, and we're going to start, I guess, unpacking some of those. And when we're talking about, you mentioned trends and what's coming next, that seems like it's a hard thing to predict. Your view on when you hear the term "what's coming next," because everyone's always looking for next. How do you view what's coming next?
Well, there's two things I would say. One is we like these trends or inflection points, but we don't like things that are trendy. So we want to be before the trend and take bets there. And so that means that we're not always going to get it right. But that's okay because venture law is a power law business, which means the winners should win so massively that they'll make up for those for the inevitable failures. And failure is just part of venture capital, startups, the power law. And so we don't have to be right about every trend, but we have to be early in order to capture that trend. And we have to be taking risk on things that other people don't see.
I guess that's, I think, when we spoke earlier, you mentioned, investors, people in the stock market, other type of investments. And if you're investing after you've seen the run up and once you see the trend form, you're probably late. And if you're looking to capture that avalanche, there's a certain amount of risk associated with being early. You're going to get it wrong. When you're evaluating these opportunities, obviously you have to have some barometer. You mentioned invisible signals, like if you're looking backwards, you could go, oh, well, there were signs of an avalanche after the fact. When you're looking before the fact and you're trying to understand which of these could have that avalanche impact effect, what are some of the attributes you guys hope to see?
Well, we look at some things that I would call inevitable. So, for example, once you look at demographics in society today, so most places in the Western world or China have declining demographics. So, the birth rate is going down. People are living longer, so they're staying older longer. Like that's not changing. that's pretty baked in right now. I mean, maybe the birth rate could go up and then, and that will change. So we don't totally know what's going to happen with the birth rate, but we do know that like the size of the population and the dynamics between the ages is a pretty obvious trend. And that then has implications on a whole host of industries like healthcare and education that you can predict. One of the big trends that you see in higher education is that the price of college is going up, 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 and the like wages for college graduates, and of course there's like nuance in the data, is stagnant or sometimes declining, so that marginal value of a degree has gone down over time. And those are huge trends that, while today the college the original Avalanche was about the unbundling of the higher education sector based on this trend of, poor value for money declining over time. And we're still just beginning to see the impacts of that avalanche. And there's inflection points that you can't necessarily predict, like COVID, that bring that to bear. And then we believe that AI is a natural extension of software development and is just part of the curve of faster and faster automation and software. So it's not necessarily a disruptive technology. It's a incremental technology of, software eating the world. Now it's just eating the world faster.
I love that. I actually, as you were saying that, I was like, I completely agree. You see AI and you hear all the talk about, all the change, and it's like, well, fundamentally, it had to have a precursor of certain software infrastructure pieces in place and then develop into what it is. I was going to ask you about this early phenomenon because I'm kind of sitting here and I'm thinking, a mad scientist, not literally a mad scientist, but the mad scientist type is the type of person that comes up with this idea that could fundamentally change things. Sometimes they're outlandish and they're impossible, and sometimes the market just isn't ready, and you need a V2. I guess we saw that a lot with even books in the early days of the internet. We saw a lot of people trying to sell books. A couple of them actually were pre-Amazon, and they didn't succeed. When you look at some of those factors and you're like, well, maybe V2 of this idea will succeed, is understanding that avalanche trend more important than seeing V1 succeed, so that you're like, hey, we are now on the precipice of finding maybe the next person who could solve for this problem if the other person hasn't solved for it?
Well, I'd say that it's the third variable, which you didn't mention, which is who is the founder that's trying to capture that opportunity. And, do they have the drive, determination, skills, and ability to build the team and manage capital to survive the inevitable like ups and downs, but stay alive long enough to find the right solution to an inevitable future.
So finding the avalanche is not just the jockey, not just the race, but the combination of the two. So it was hard. Now it's a little bit harder because obviously it's the right person running the race. When you're looking, for that person, and you're like, this idea sounds great. It sounds like it has some potential avalanche, tendencies, and you're looking at the founder. Over time, what have you seen in terms of founders that have shown that propensity of being able to capitalize when an avalanche happens?
Well, there are a couple of things. First, I'd say there's founders and then founding teams. So usually making sure that you have a full set of skill sets, at least sales and technical capability in one founding team. And so we have a mantra that technology is built by technologists. So if you're building technology, you have to have a technologist that's a co-founder. And technology doesn't necessarily always have to be like AI engineer. It's sometimes in education, it could be, someone who's built a very innovative pedagogy and has been in the industry for a long time, but they at least have to think like an innovator or an inventor. And then they have to be able to sell their ideas and see the opportunity. And one of the other things that we look for is we like people who are, quote, building their life's work. So they've thought about a problem for a long time. They've been in the sector, and they now think that like they're going to go all in on an idea whose time has come, and that they are the right person to build it, because those people will have like all the research. They will have thought about it from every angle. They will stay up and all night to push through, and they're not going to just change their idea because a couple people, they lost a big client, or a couple investors said they didn't like it.
How and that's actually great. I mean, and I'm thinking through this person. I mean, we've seen there's well-known founders, founding teams that actually really resemble what you described. But at some point, as a VC, when you're investing in someone, and the right factors have come, if things have not gone right, how much rope, how much time? I mean, you could use any phrase you want, but how much time do you give someone and go, I've given this person every chance to prove that they can deliver on this big vision that's obviously still kind of working its way through the system?
Yeah, I think that totally just depends on what the journey has looked like. If they've been capital efficient, if they've constantly learning and adapting and iterating quickly, and if they've been transparent with you, so like sending monthly updates, like keeping you updated, then it's like I can be supportive of people for a very long time. If they kind of like begin to change their idea every 6 weeks, or they don't have the right capabilities on the team, or they kind of like don't send you a metric driven update for months, like you're kind of disrespecting your investors at that point. So, or I shouldn't say that. It's not about respect. It's like it's just maybe it's just not going to work out. Because what I will say is there's not a single founder that anyone has ever met that hasn't had like a string of like failures behind them, or ideas that didn't work out, or like, they tried many different things before they found the thing that got like the product market fit. Anyone who has started a big company knows there's often years of that.
How do you view? You mentioned changing ideas every 6 weeks, and obviously part of what you spoke about earlier was the person that will go through the walls, will make it through those failures. If they lose one customer, if there's something that went wrong, they will drive forward. You also hear a lot about pivoting. Yeah, the original idea isn't what the company became. What's the nuanced difference between a founder that is changing ideas and one that is pivoting?
Usually they don't change their like overarching thesis or their customer. They think of a different way. They're like, oh, well, this is a problem to be solved, and I'm going to think of a new way of solving it. Or I'm going to figure out a different business model to capitalize on that. So, for example, Google, right? Like there were a lot of search engines. I mean, Yahoo, Bing, like there's a lot of ways to search the internet, and maybe they had a better product, but they also did two things, or a better algorithm, but they also did two things that were different. Like one is they made their homepage totally like great UX UI, right? It was just one interface to search. And then second of all is they monetized the exhaust of being like, okay, so once you search, what the value really is not in like, oh, we're going to charge someone every time they search. We're really going to sell advertising slots to advertisers because there's a high intent action that we're capturing. So the business model allowed the like Google flywheel to take off maybe more than some of their competitors that ran out of money. And potentially, I wasn't around, or maybe I'm not technical enough. I mean, maybe they did also have superior algorithms as well, right? And so like that's one thing, particularly the deeper tech you go, is like, how good is your invention? And is it truly like, does it differentiate at scale where you just get more and more customers because everyone's like, well, I want to use the good algorithm, like the one that actually works instead of the bad one.
That's too funny. I like that. Yeah, I mean that's actually a good point, and I think that the changing ideas versus pivoting and still understanding your core customer. I guess when you mentioned the ideal founder, and you kind of mentioned some attributes, how much of someone that wants to take advantage and be able to, see the avalanche through and actually realize the economic gains of it, how much of the attributes of that person is that charismatic person? Because we see a lot of that on social media, right? That's the person that gravitates to social media. Everyone talks about those people. Everyone's seen the videos and clips of those type of personalities. Is that just, based on the fact that, hey, these became really big companies and these personalities bubbled to the top? Or do you need some of that? If you're going to take advantage of an avalanche, you have to be able to track that attention, be able to draw those people to you, whether it's employees, whether it's customers, whatever that would be.
It's a little tough to tell and completely generalize. I like to index on the founders that are, a little strange or weird or rebellious and maybe don't fit the mold. And I don't think that you have to be like a great tweeter to be a great founder. I don't think any of our founders that have done really well are super active on Twitter, to be honest. And I think that's actually true of most people's portfolios. When you look at the performance, and it's also like a skill that you can learn over time, right? Like you can get better at telling your story. You can get better at getting more press and getting more charismatic. Like Mark Zuckerberg has certainly gotten like way better over time. But he, had captured everyone's attention on his platform first. And so I don't think that it's necessary to be charismatic to be a successful founder. I think that's a learnable skill.
Interesting. I like that. I guess, times could, and the situation could be where, you see this idea that's great and you have a founding team, and at some point there's some pieces that are not working, and then you might need some addition, you may need some subtraction. How do you see, how has that played out in the past? Like when you see a situation where a founder does seem like they have the right idea, but they're missing some of the tools, and I guess it's hard because it's their baby, they want to see it through, and it's like, well, you might not be the best person to take it to the next level.
So I focus, at least right now, primarily on pre-seed and seed. So usually you need a founder who can take it through at least like a Series A before you bring in an outsider, because there's just no one who's going to care more about that business than they will. And so much of the compensation is in equity and in upside. So it's very tricky and difficult to do those transitions. But sometimes it does happen early, and it often does happen later. And I think that you have to be able to have, as an investor, a good partnership based on trust and transparency with the founder, where you can kind of mediate through, what are the expectations? What are the challenges? Like, who's the right person to bring on next? Do a wide search, find that, build trust in the process, and hopefully, get to an outcome where everyone is happy and incentives are aligned appropriately. But it's tricky.
I'm sure not a fun conversation or a topic to have to broach with any team. You've kind of outlined a lot of attributes. Are there things that you've seen founders who are in that seed stage that you've seen a lot of them could stand to improve? Are there some general like areas you're like, what, if you're a founder out there, you're at the seed stage, these are maybe 2 or 3 things where you just might not know it's coming down the pike, but you should be proactively working on these type of skills?
Everyone's on their own learning journey, and they have different strengths and weaknesses. I think hiring is one of those strengths, though, that you always have to have, because the quality of your team compounds over time, and it will either drive you to success or stall you out. And so I think that's one that you have to get good at. And then you also just have to have exceptional judgment. So like each decision that you make is well reasoned and thought out, and that you have this bias towards action. The best Jeff Bezos's leadership principles at Amazon are still just kind of like the best at it. I just named 2 of them, but there's 14, and each one of them is good.
When you're looking at these companies and you're hearing the ideas and you're thinking through things, how do you start evaluating all these different concepts? I mean, you're early, so some of the stuff is early, research, early theory, early concepts? How do you stay up and try to help yourself evaluate, what might be an avalanche down the road?
A founder or an avalanche?
Well, for you to actually be able to identify the avalanche, I mean, the founder's a separate question, I suppose.
Usually you see some sign of momentum of this, like it might be early product market fit is another way to think about it, but it's just kind of like, okay, they've like hit on something that seems to really like you've touched a nerve. And when you repeat it to people, they're like, aha, I didn't think about it like that before. I didn't think about it like that before, but it makes a lot of sense. Or, people just, it keeps on like coming up in a very organic way without you forcing it. So I think that's one of the things you have to be cognizant of, is to not be susceptible to like confirmation bias, where you're like, well, I want this to be the case. I want this to be the future. So I'm going to look for every data point that confirms what I already believe. And instead you have to really be open to answers and experimentation that you might not have expected.
And I guess as you're, similarly getting, founders coming to you and you're having to evaluate them, as you mentioned, you have to, these are the operators, these are the executors, and you're hearing the pitch. There's not a lot of product behind it. How do you start evaluating who you are willing to take a risk on?
I think that people have to have something that's truly like exceptional about them, that they've come with an idea or a concept or the company that truly shows like excellence and vision that is much more sophisticated. When it doesn't look good is like, if I feel like I know more about what you're building than you do, or I know more about the market, or I'm like, oh, have you seen these two companies that are building in your space? And they're like, no, I had no idea. I'm like, well, not a good sign. But usually like the best founders are, and these are for us anyway, like ones that are building their life's work, are just like all over it. And they have like that you could talk to them for 10 hours and they'd have more articles and they'd have more proof points. And then the other thing is that we look for is, if I do give them feedback, because I'm pretty direct and open, and I'm like, here's what I think, like how quickly do they act on it? So there's one founder in my portfolio that I basically was like, yeah, you're, like, I see where you're going, but your deck's kind of a mess, and here are the holes and all the stuff. And he flipped around the deck, like a new deck, in 24 hours. And was like, I listened to what you said. Here's where I agree. And we've, changed our strategy and approach accordingly. So that sort of ability to like quick learning pattern.
Final question for you. When you're looking at founders, obviously first-time founders, serial entrepreneurs, and you're evaluating, obviously that's an interesting piece about how they incorporate feedback. Is there any difference between that first-time founder and the serial entrepreneur in terms of what you've seen, how feedback is assimilated? Obviously it's per person, but just as a general question.
I think sometimes younger founders can think that they're kind of like out to prove the world wrong, and they know best. And sometimes they get it right, and like when that happens, it's unbelievable. But often they don't know everything, and the sort of advice that you gave them turns out to be the downfall of their company. And that's okay. Like they'll learn. They'll probably be amazing second-time founders or third-time founders. That's why it's always a bit of a risk to back a first-time founder. And I think sometimes the proof points for first-time founders or young, not just first-time, but young founders goes up, where you're like, okay, do they already have product market fit? Like, have they already built something that has a flywheel to it? Because then you can't argue with revenue and customers and growth. But if they don't have those things and they're trying to, be stubborn, they will eventually, the market will teach them. You don't need to teach them.
I like that. That is true. The market will dictate, and yeah, I love that. Katelyn, I appreciate all the time and the insights. If somebody wants to reach out to you to kind of follow up or just continue the conversation, what's an optimal way of getting hold of you?
Yeah, so my email is Katelyn@avalanche.vc. You can also email hello@avalanche.vc. It goes to the same place. But you can also follow me on Twitter or LinkedIn. Likes, shares, comments, engagement on our content is my love language. So that's a good way to get to know me.
Okay, I like it. We'll be sure to include some of those links in the show notes so everyone can find you. Thank you again. I appreciate the conversation.
Great. Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. That's it for the episode. Be back again, different guest, different topic. If you do find this episode useful, tons of insights that Katelyn provided, please share with somebody else. That's how this podcast grows. So I appreciate everyone that does share the episode. And if you want me to cover a specific topic, let me know. I will try to find a guest to do so. Otherwise, like, subscribe. I love that review. I love the reviews too. I'd like to know how I'm doing. So good or bad, let me know. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.